First of all, I would like to say thank you for those who are attending seminar today, who's joining us with us. First of all, I will just briefly introduce myself. My name is Mulukan Elias Adamsaked. I'm a researcher on innovation scaling at the International Water Management IMI, based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Today we will give a seminar on process tracing, and of course, this is part of the MELIA&SPA team meeting. MELIA&SPA team, who's working from IMI side, I think before a couple of months, I think in June, Amin and Miria gave a seminar on scaling preparedness, on concepts and application of CGR post-event briefing note. I think this is what they were presented. And today in particular, we'll have this seminar on process tracing. This we have our colleagues who recently joined us, Nicola, Tom and Alex. Alex, who unfortunately couldn't join us today. So I will give the floor for Nicola and Tom, of course, to introduce yourself, and also afterwards to present your presentation. And as far as I understand, it's possible, I guess, to put our question in the chat box, and also after the presentation. And if in case, I think it might be also possible to make it more interactive, even during the presentation, to forward our question. So Nicola and Tom, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Mulukan. Okay, so I'll introduce myself. I'm Nicola. I'm working as an independent consultant. So I'm leading this particular service together with Tom and Alex. I've been working in the field of monitoring and evaluation and learning for the past 10 to 15 years. And more recently, I was heading the meal services team at Action Against Hunger. And yes, I recently started working as an independent consultant. So I'm glad to meet you all, and hopefully we'll have a fruitful session today. So I'll pass it over to Tom.
Nice to meet you all. So Nico, Alex and I all worked at Care International together several years ago. Similar sort of background, lots of work in this kind of thing, and I've done some previous work for other parts of CGAR. So very keen to start this process and to meet some more of you in person at some point. Back to you, Nico.
Okay. Great. So we want to have this as a session where you can ask questions. We appreciate that we don't have a lot of time, so we're going to try to address some of the questions today. But if you can specify your name in the question, in case we're not able to follow up directly through this conversation, we can then follow up afterwards. So feel free to let any type of doubt or comment just flow through the chat, where we'll monitor the space, but also in case we're not able to address all of your concerns. So I'll just share the presentation that we have today. Please let me know if you can see.
There.
Yeah.
I can't see the whole screen on my side.
Not yet.
Yeah, it's just the middle column at the moment.
So let me see if I can share another way.
If you're struggling, I could try, Nico.
No, I can just upload the presentation. Okay. Can you see this if I share? So instead of like the regular view, can you see it better like this?
It's the same, unfortunately.
Okay. So
Should
maybe,
I try?
yeah, if you can try,
Let's
see.
see if it comes up for me.
Yeah.
Apologies for this, everyone.
Sorry.
Oh, that's fine.
If I will share my screen. How does that look?
That works fine.
Good.
Perfect.
Okay, go ahead, Nico.
Thank you. All right, so we already did the introduction, so we can start just with the presentation of the consultancy, just to provide you with an overview of what we were tasked to support CGR with. So you see here that we have a number of deliverables. So we are carrying out process tracing assessment across 7 areas, across the 4 outcome areas and 7 across the different countries of operation, looking at innovation bundles. We'll be compiling that information into other products. You see, for example, a data set. We'll have those semi-annual process tracing assessment reports as well to follow up with the different changes. And we'll, at the end of the service, be also conducting an impact evaluation. And some of the deliverables of this impact evaluation you see here, it's a matrix and also a report. But throughout the engagement, we expect to have various conversations with you and working closely with you throughout the next few quarters. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see a little bit an idea of timelines. So we're looking at right now, we are at the scoping phase. So we are reviewing various types of documents and having different types of conversations also with various counterparts. So we engage, we expect to engage with all of you at the country level as well in the next few weeks to be able to define the key areas we want to look at from a process tracing perspective, and also to have a plan basically on how to move forward. So this is primarily a formative phase where we want to kind of explore this methodology, make sure that we are able to communicate in the same language, and then conducting the assessment during the coming quarter. So you'll see here a number of tasks. We intend to have a gradual data collection for the process tracing assessment over the course of the 2024 year. And then towards the end of next year, have the impact assessment conducted, where we'll be looking at various forms of evidence and also some of the engagement with you throughout the process tracing tasks will support the overall impact assessment report as well. So if we go to the next slide, we just present here some key terminology. What do we mean for evidence? You see here that we have different interpretation when we look at data, and essentially we are looking at how evidence is anything that we see or experience that causes us to believe that something is true, right? So we have the concept of evidence when we're trying to validate a claim. So that's a bit the initial concept to then explain this methodology. So going to the next slide, we have a little bit more thoughts around what do we look for evidence? I mean, for what, where, and what for. So through some of the methodologies we want to explore with you during the next few quarters, we're looking at evidence from its probative value. So really looking at what a specific piece of evidence is supporting our explanation when we're trying to explain the cause and effects of some of the changes that we see, and whether that explanation is towards a certain improvement or as well a regression in a condition or a situation. So a lot of the language we're going to be using is the strength of evidence claims. So how strong is a claim from a point of view of evidence that has been collected throughout the specific causal pathway or specific key steps that we're looking at from cause to effect. So we look at evidence from a relevancy perspective. So in that respect, we look at the subject population, the location of a specific implementation is taking place, what are the main learning questions that we're trying to address. And then we look at, is this good enough evidence? So we will obviously have more engagement with you to share key language and key tools to guide the judgment of evidence that we come across throughout a project or throughout a specific project cycle. So I think from next slide, it starts for, I think it's still my part, or it's your part, Tom? I think
it's me now, I think, probably.
Perfect, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Nico. I'm going to give you a brief summary of what process tracing is, and then walk you through an example from Ghana, which we know quite well. So I'm just going to walk you through some of the basic steps. If we had a bit more time, I would have gone through an exercise, shown you a video. There's a lot more that we can dig deep into what process tracing is, what it's about. This is just an introductory session. We have longer sessions of half days, 3 days, 5 days on which some of this builds. This is therefore just a snapshot. What process tracing is essentially a case-based methodology, and it's theory-based. So it's based around theories of change and based around the logic of case studies, essentially. What makes it process tracing is essentially an idea about tracing causal processes. These are sometimes called mechanisms, and the links between causes and effects. So essentially between actions and outcomes, to put it quite simply. And what it helps us to do is to logically assess the significance of actors' contributions towards a particular change or particular outcome of interest. So you have to focus on which that outcome is, as I'll come to in a second. So why is process tracing important or helpful? It's widely viewed as a theory-based method that is good at uncovering causality because it has a very granular assessment of the relationships between actions and outcomes. It helps to identify the processes of change, so not just the input and the impact, but how we get from one to the other, and other factors that help to explain that process. So not just our actions, but those in the wider ecosystem, if you like. As per the point on probative value, so the value of evidence, it helps us to get to a slightly deeper understanding of what's happening and why it's happening. So it helps to uncover a bit more of the why, usually. It can be helpful in terms of proving or disproving, so it can also help us to understand failures as well as successes potentially. We're hoping that the process assessment aspect of this will also help you guys to adapt strategies as you go, potentially. That's not necessarily the case, but hopefully it will inform certain decisions in the process, and it can potentially inform future decisions as you go forward about what works, how, and why. How do you actually do this? Unlike some other methods, you have to have an outcome that has materialized before you can really start the process in earnest. There's a funny graphic there of what the difference between an output and an outcome is. I've written quite extensively on this if you're interested, but basically when we refer to an outcome, it refers to a concrete change in behavior or practices. It could also be a change in a policy or something like that, but a change in a policy is also a change of a particular practice of a particular actor. So it is an actor doing something different or differently. So what you need is an outcome that's observable, something that has already happened. For example, if someone had changed their mind about process tracing as a result of this webinar, for instance, we would want to be able to see what the observable change of that was, a particular action that somebody had taken, not just an attitude change, but something that they did as a result of that information. For lots of you guys, it would be how do we know that somebody used the research, for instance, or a part of the research would be something you could look at, or a particular policy that might have been changed, for instance. And so what you're trying to do is, based on the outcome that has happened that you can identify, you then build up a claim about the steps in the process between your actions and those potentially of others, and a particular outcome of interest. Here's a few examples of outcomes that we've slightly abstracted, just to give you a sense of what we're talking about. So in this case, district assemblies, and this was in Ghana, if I recall correctly, increasingly responded to citizen concerns. So there were concrete instances where district assemblies had changed building practices, procured more infrastructure or something like that. The second one relates to financing, as you can see. And the third one also relates to policy commitments and funding. So these are the sorts of things that you can assess really with process tracing. Could also be adoptions of innovations and the process towards the adoption, and scaling and all the rest of it as well, just to give you a flavor. Once you've defined what the outcome is, you then make a claim about what your contribution to that outcome is. Very rarely for anything important are you the only actor that contributes to the materialization of that outcome. So it's a contribution claim more than an attribution claim for most types of outcomes, at least. But what you try and elaborate is a little bit more about who did what, when, with whom, where, to try and get concreteness to the type of change that we're specifying, and what your contributions were to that process amongst those of others. It really helps if you have a theory of change to start, and it really helps to make that process, that theory of change, as testable as possible. And by testable, I mean that we can clearly identify who is doing what in those steps. So not an abstract theory of change, but a more granular theory of change about what actually happened, not just what we hypothesized might happen. So what you do, and this is an illustration of a causal process or a causal mechanism, really simplified. Very often you have several of these alongside one another, not just a single one. But what you do is you describe the key actions of particular actors, and where possible, you try and shed light on why they might be pursuing a particular action. So this is just an abstracted version. We'll give you a bit more illustration in a minute. But what you're trying to do is draw the connection in a logical sequence of cause and effect between various actions and the particular outcome of interest. Okay? As Nico mentioned, this is about processes, and it's about the quality or the strength of evidence. And so in terms of making a judgment related to the strength of evidence, you need to build in certain aspects. So things related to what is in the context, to understand what does evidence actually mean? What might be the biases of different actors, for instance, and a whole series of other factors that influence what a particular item of evidence might mean. So for instance, if somebody had decided, let's say a government authority had decided to co-fund a particular part of the project, we want to understand what they were funding previously. What sorts of things did they fund? How different actually would that action be, for instance, to understand what the relevant evidence might be, what that evidence might mean, and therefore what we can infer from that evidence were we to find it. And broadly speaking, process tracing is agnostic on what evidence is good evidence. It depends on the context and the process that you're trying to investigate. But broadly, you categorize evidence either as helping to confirm or to disconfirm a contribution claim that you have. So the scales there are just to illustrate that you might have something that helps to confirm or helps to disconfirm. There are specific evidence tests that are geared towards doing this. You can see on the left-hand side the two that are basically for disconfirmation. So if you don't find this, you reduce your confidence. And on the right-hand side is forms of evidence that helps to confirm your claim. I don't want to go into the details of these because the metaphors are quite complicated and the specifications are also quite complicated, but it's just to give you a sense that there are evidence tests behind the scenes which you can construct, which help you to understand the degree to which you might help to confirm or disconfirm a particular explanation. It's also really helpful where possible, not only to draw up what your claims are, but what other people's claims might be. So in the example that I'll give you, which relates to Oxfam in Ghana, it's related to policy change, you could conceivably think of an alternative coalition or campaign that might have influenced the outcome of interest, perhaps before the coalition from Oxfam and its colleagues. So it can really help to hypothesize an alternative claim that might contradict your explanation. But it's also important to outline what other factors are contributing to the outcome that you believe you contributed to. Behind this, you can actually see another mechanism from Ghana, which Nico and I had worked on several years ago, which was the district assembly one that was mentioned previously. But it's just to illustrate that we don't just look, if possible, at our contributions, but also those of others where possible. Now, let me give you a real example from Ghana, which relates to healthcare insurance back in, well, about a decade ago now, basically, to give you a sense of what we're looking at or the sort of things that we're looking for. So this relates to a policy change, if you like. This all materialized related to the publication of a report which was related to the coverage of universal healthcare or free universal healthcare in Ghana. What the report suggested was that the coverage was substantially lower than that claimed by the government of Ghana. So the report claimed it was 18%, whereas the government claimed it was 67%. That's obviously a very big difference of people who are covered, and arguably only a small proportion of people of poorest households were covered. So that's a problem, if you like, that this report claims that it outlined. Oxfam and coalition or campaign colleagues, which was from dozens, if not hundreds of organizations as part of the campaign, had a theory of change. So you can see just at the top, just to illustrate, they had a theory of change, not brilliantly elaborated necessarily, but that they believed that at the top, the government of Ghana legislates for quality and accessible universal healthcare for all by 2015. So that was the impact goal or the long-term aim, if you like. That wasn't the claim that they actually made related to a particular outcome. The claim that they made was what was outlined here related to the campaign leading the government of Ghana to revise its methodology for calculating membership of the National Health Insurance Scheme. So far more specific than just the government of Ghana legislating for free and quality healthcare, which is very broad and pretty vague, and many actors would have contributed to something that is a lot more specific and concrete and can more easily be linked to actions of the particular campaign. It didn't really start like that. In the real case, the first claim that was made was that the campaign had supported reforms in the health system. It doesn't really tell us very much, does it? This was then specified further and further, so it was refined to that final claim, as you can see. So it's really important to try and make your claim more specific because that makes it more testable. It also makes it more credible, most probably, in most cases as well. So big and vague and broad, not very helpful. Specific or relatively specific, much more testable, much more helpful, and much more credible, usually. So the first thing you have to do is put the claim in context. Quite a number of you on the call, I think, are in Ghana, so I'm hoping that some of you will have some background knowledge of some of this, but just to illustrate, it was a politically charged context. So it was around about the time of presidential elections. The campaign was enormous, had quite substantial reach, and there wasn't another campaign that was openly criticizing the coverage data. Okay, so there's something sort of unique, if you like, potentially related to the campaign there. And there were other actors that were not very happy about what Oxfam and its partners were advocating for, because in this case, the World Bank thought that Ghana was doing a pretty good job, and was using it as a success case. So there were people who didn't want these findings to come out in quite that way, conceivably. What happened in the process of evaluation is that the evaluator boiled down the real steps in the process to the materialization of the outcome to just these 4 relatively simple steps in the process. So you can see that this is quite a simple set of steps. Most often you have more steps than this, but it's just to illustrate that you try and boil it down to the necessary steps towards the materialization of the particular outcome that you're looking at. And I'll walk you through some of what happened just now and what evidence was available or not available to demonstrate the case. So here you can see possible evidence that you might expect or you would like to find to confirm or disconfirm the claim. So, for example, you would expect the methodology to actually be revised. If the methodology had not been revised, the claim is obviously a nonsense. It didn't really happen, if you like. The outcome didn't truly materialize. And there are other things that you would really expect to find, and if you didn't find them, you would cast doubt on the contribution claim of the campaign. But there's also evidence that broadly helps to confirm your claim that you might not perhaps expect to hear. So you might not necessarily expect the government to publish a statement quoting the campaign's report as a contributing factor to the decision that they made. Governments don't often want to admit that they changed their mind and that they were wrong, and that's why we wouldn't necessarily expect to find that evidence. So if you do find that evidence, because it's counter to their incentives, it's actually pretty strong evidence, for instance. Those are just 2 illustrations. There's a few more that you'll see in a second. I'm going to walk through really quickly just to give you a sense of what it looks like, and we can touch on any specifics later on, but I wanted to make sure we've got some time for some questions and some discussion. So this is just to walk you through. So the report was published on the 9th of March, which is my birthday. And we found a counter statement from the NHIA director, who did not like the report, as you can see. So we have a citation there saying that it was flawed analysis, we didn't like it. But they had obviously read it, because you wouldn't probably make a statement that it was a rubbish report had you not read it. So we were confident at this point that they had read it. By the 17th of March, that's when you get the counter statement. You then find some quotations in the newsletter, and this is several months later, and they're still clearly bothered about this report. Okay, so you can see the offensive against the NHIA was desperate and error-strewn, an attack on the NHIS. So they're still angry about this. They still don't like this report. It's still irking them. And that was in September. So many months later, they are still seriously bothered by the findings of this report. It still clearly is a problem for them. That's important. You then find quotations from the annual report. And what do you know? There's an admission that they had done an exercise to validate the data in the first quarter of 2011 to appraise the accuracy of the information from 2010, which is the information that Oxfam was criticising. And they realised that there was something wrong with how they had calculated the methodology, right? And that they had decided that they would provide they would work up a new and more appropriate methodology. So they have clearly changed something. They've decided to do something differently. We don't yet know why, but it's evident that they have decided to do something differently. And it may perhaps at this point relate to the Oxfam report. So you can see that was in October. Now, there's certain things that you'd really need to see for it to be true. So you need somebody to acknowledge to some degree that the changes happened after the campaign report, so that it happens in the right period of time. If they decided to do things prior to reading the report, then obviously the report perhaps didn't make a difference. So this is a sort of testimony that you would probably need to see as a bare minimum that the timing matches, for instance. So that's quite important. But then you have more confirming testimony, more powerful testimony that perhaps you wouldn't expect to see. And so this was one that was if you like, clinching evidence towards the very end of the process, which came from the Ghana delegation and from a person who had recently left the Ministry of Health, and therefore their incentives to tell all had changed, and to be honest, if you like, had changed. And so what was released in this was a behind-the-scenes admission that the so-called Oxfam report, and I think criticised as the Oxfam report for more rhetorical reasons than it was only their efforts, that it was in fact helpful and prompted them to revise their own figures. This was not a public declaration, but a behind-the-scenes declaration which acknowledges in the correspondence of the meeting for the Ghana delegation, World Health Organization, World Bank, and recall what I said earlier, that the bank actually wanted to hold this up as a good case and therefore do not really have incentives to say this, and nor indeed perhaps with the Ghana delegation. And so the reason that this is powerful testimony is precisely because we wouldn't necessarily expect to hear it, but it helps to confirm the links, not just the chronology, which is necessary, but that the contents of the report had some bearing. Exactly what bearing, there's more detail on in the evaluation. But this is just to illustrate the sorts of evidence that we might need or that we might hope for to demonstrate particular links in a particular causal chain. And in this case, this is related to a methodology change for the National Health Insurance Scheme. So that's just an illustration, very, very briefly. Couple of key takeaways as to what process tracing is about. So just to remind you, it's case-based. So looking at case studies, you're hoping to look at alternative possible explanations as part of the process. You need an observed outcome. So in the metaphor of a murder case, for instance, you need a dead body in order to trace the contributions. If the body is still alive, there is nothing to investigate yet. So we may, in our case, have to look forward and say, what kinds of outcomes do we anticipate finding? And when they happen, we can say, we confirm that this has now happened. We can now assess this potentially in the process. You need to make a contribution claim related to a particular observed outcome. And it's helpful to look at the contributions of others in the process. What we do is we develop evidence tests to both confirm and disconfirm the steps in the process that are identified. And in general, we categorize them thus as both either confirming or disconfirming evidence. And what we would like to do with you guys is to elaborate some of these causal chains and to identify what evidence can help to confirm or disconfirm the claims that you and others may have. So that's a very, very brief summary of some of the basics. Don't expect that you'll have got absolutely everything necessarily, but we have plenty more time going forwards to elaborate further, to look at further detail, and to get even more specific on your own cases when we come there. So looking forward to that. I'm going to pass back to Nico now. So over to you, Nico.
Sure.
Sorry, Nico. I'm just wondering if before processing tracing operational implications, I'm just wondering if the participants have any let's say question of understanding really before really going into these operational implications. Let's just give them some if they have any question.
Don't worry if not.
Yeah. Just, I mean, really, maybe just one brief question, which is maybe so that this might be also a question for others. It's just to know really, just briefly to mention really what the difference of process tracing maybe from, I don't know, compared to I don't know, other approach which could potentially be applied. I mean, it just because I think these days we have like other methods or approaches could be like what makes this one really different, or let's say more applicable, let's say, just to make sure that we are we are going to use this. I mean, this is also, of course, in the concept and develop in the project proposal. We would like to know really what makes this process tracing really more an appropriate approach for this, let's say, initiative. Let's just briefly, I mean, if Tommy just say a few words on that.
Let me give you a few. So first of all, there are other methods that are helpful that also use parts of process tracing that people have used at CGIAR. And what they see as valuable in process tracing is two things: is detailing the processes of change, so the mechanisms of change, in as granular detail as you possibly can. So this is more granular than usually from contribution analysis or just looking at a theory of change. So we have various levels of theory of change in this initiative. And what you're looking to do is break down the component parts, not just related to the theoretical expectations of what we hope will happen in the future, but what has actually happened, and documenting those processes in greater detail. The second thing that it's good for, that relatively few other methods are good for, is explicitly looking at the strength of evidence and assessing rival explanations. So I was in a workshop yesterday with the deputy head of the Evaluation Task Force in the UK, which sets evaluation standards in the UK. And her biggest concern of most methods was, to what degree do other methods help to rule out alternative explanations? Process tracing is something that at least can get you close to ruling out alternative explanations. It depends how much time you have to do it. It depends what resources you have available to gather the right sort of data and to find it. But at least it has the potential to do that, and relatively few other methods do. So I'd say detailing the process, appraising evidence and the strength of evidence, and hopefully also looking at potentially ruling out or at least casting doubt on alternative explanations. Those would be my hopefully quick answers. I can see somebody might have a hand up.
Hi. Maybe this is a question that will be responded in the operational part, but I was thinking in practical terms, is this something that you sort of trace everything from the start, or is it something where at the end you think you have an outcome that you contributed to and you work back to really find out if that's the case and if you have the evidence?
So we may come to this in the practical, but I think in our case, given what we've seen so far of the theories of change and the reports so far, we will probably have to do both, in that I think it will be helpful to envisage what milestones or steps are likely to happen in the process, so we know what to potentially look for if those outcomes have not yet materialized, and then say, this is an important enough outcome that has happened, and then you trace back from there. So probably what we'll need to do in reality is trace forwards for several months, and then once we reach a point we say, this is the point we now trace back as an impact assessment, then we detail the real steps as we see them in the process, and we test that process and alternative processes and the evidence that we have to explain the process. So really concretely, for instance, you have scaling readiness levels, and it may well be that you get to, let's say, level 6 or 5 or something like that, just to illustrate. You may have to provide evidence for a particular step of adoption, let's say. And so what we would be doing is be looking at what were the steps that preceded that process, and what kind of evidence do we have to demonstrate that, for example, that the government decided to co-fund a particular thing, or decided to replicate an aspect of a methodology or something like that. So we'd be looking at what's the final outcome that's significant enough for us to look at, and then we would from there go backwards and forwards, really, from what had been done and the logical steps in the process towards that outcome, and then we would compare that against other explanations and other contributions as part of that. Does that help? I think it was Jenny. I think I saw Jenny.
Yes, thank you.
Great. I don't know, Monica, if it's worth us continuing. I'm happy to answer more questions if helpful, but yeah. I'm just wondering.
I don't see any hands now. I think you can proceed, Nicola, and then I think I mean, the implication part is more, I think, which is more important. So there will be some more questions there.
Thanks. Then let me just share my screen once.
Yeah, you're still sharing your screen. Yeah, great. Yeah, so great. So we can just go to the next one. So, I mean, the first phase of this process is for us to look at all the innovation bundles that are part of the program and to apply some criteria so we can identify 7 that we're able to support through this process. So we are looking at different dimensions because we want to make some decisions based on some of the evidence that we already gathered from the various countries. You want to be able to see, for instance, one of the metric, the skill readiness levels of some of those innovations and the supporting evidence behind some of those decisions. And also the engagement with the counterparts. So the willingness and the level of motivation as well to be part of this this process, which is in a way formative, but also helping this impact assessment overall approach as well, leveraging on data that we will be able to collect throughout next year and in the coming quarters. Then we're also looking at regional balance, making sure there is enough coverage across initiatives between regions and across all the work packages as well. So we want to make sure that we're looking at the 4 outcome areas. And then we want to also include in that reasoning how much scaling partners are already involved in each innovation in terms of diversity and in terms of size of engagement as well. Just because the partnership focus for CGR is quite crucial, so we want to include that as part of our selection criteria. So those are based on the initial conversations we expect to have with all the counterparts across countries, and some of those initial conversations can also help us to go deeper into our understanding of the innovation bundles and going into the more operational aspects as well in terms of how we could work together, which is explained in the next slide. So some those are kind of general steps. No, can you go back to, yeah. Thank you. Those are just the general steps, and we will detail them. So every engagement will be structured in a way that gives us continuity and how we leverage on our kind of initial conversations, and how do we leverage on existing evidence and prospective evidence. So our very first step is for us to unpack the work package level theory of change in each context, looking at some of the key assumptions, for example, within each context of operation. And then it's also part of this bricolage approach. So even though we want to apply process tracing, we'll also be applying a wider set of methodologies to get us there. So in the first step would be essentially outcome mapping. So how we look at those prospective outcomes, and how do we look at the key steps and strategies to reach them, and then really unpacking the intermediary steps between an output and an outcome. So depending on the various activities that are expected to happen or have happened, and how are they contributing towards a particular outcome that we'll be identifying together out of each innovation bundle that we select. And then, so for us to have that deeper understanding of the outcome, we would apply the outcome harvesting methodology. So to really giving us a much more detailed definition of how the outcome happened, the key change agents that were involved, or the ones that are expected to be involved. So we'll be using a language that will capture the existing change and also building on that, essentially, in this initial phase. Importantly, the strength of evidence, because of the probative value that we will apply to the evidence that we gather, is quite important for us to clarify with you from a data collection and data quality perspective. So some of these tools and protocols will be shared during these workshops and engagement with you, just to make sure that we're already able to shape and direct some of the flows of evidence towards the highest standards and highest contribution value as well, while also looking at the implementation retrospectively and prospectively. So the causal claims will have progress markers that we can identify along some of the intermediary steps that we would unpack at the initial stage. And then gathering data from different actors and different forms of evidence that can support or can build on that particular claim. So this will be the first 4 steps. And so the second part would be more around verification of the evidence that we gathered, and also looking at the context as much as we can to be able to identify some of the alternative hypotheses or alternative explanations to what we observe, and also to triangulate as much as we can from multiple sources the evidence that are gathered internally, but also that we will be collecting outside for verification purposes from external stakeholders. So all of those will be, of course, we have different types of reports, and every report will have a specific shape and form, but the overall impact assessment reports will be a synthesis as well of some of this work that we will be doing together, and additional data collection to provide the strength of verification and rigor, and ideally to be able to build that confidence score or contribution score to each outcome, essentially, towards the end of the service. So those are some of the steps that obviously will have, more detailed key actions, but just to give you a general feel of how we envision this engagement to work. And then we have one more slide looking at the dimensions of a PT protocol, a process tracing protocol. So some of the information we'll be gathering from you and with your support. So this initial engagement in unpacking the causal chains, looking at the TOC at the work package level, and then contextualizing it, and making sure there is a link between the meta theory connecting all the outcomes and then the context-specific pathways as well. So defining those causal processes will be essentially the bulk of our initial conversations to really identify what are the key intermediary steps prospected or have happened, the type of evidence you have already collected, and we have some information already from that we received, but we expect to have deeper understanding through engaging directly with you, and then rolling out a data collection plan and to be able to see what is feasible, what kind of evidence or what is already in place that can be exploited, or if there are additional ideas on how some data can be shared regularly with us, so the type of support that is required for that. And then looking at criteria of evidence, what kind of evidence, according to the claim, seems like a stronger form of evidence, or confirmatory or disconfirmatory. So the language on some of the criteria will be applied also in how we review the evidence that we collect. So there will be other operational details we see in the protocol. So some of the timelines for review of the evidence that was possible to collect. And then roles and responsibilities in terms of ways of working. So how do we work with you? What kind of review support we can provide throughout the data collection cycle, in the implementation of the PT protocol, and what is the additional data collection that will be required to provide that level of validation, verification, and rigor to some of the claims as well from an external perspective. And then the more operational aspect of ethics and how we will be reporting and documenting back to you based on everything that we are able to collect or we expect and hope to collect. And yeah, so those are some of the dimensions that we want to really unpack with you as we have more in-depth engagement, just to go into the nitty-gritty and to see how some of those workshops could be also opportunities to build on the formative phase, making sure that from your side also there is kind of a learning element, learning value to be part of this methodology and this overall approach. So I'll stop here. I know we have a few minutes left in case there are some more questions on the process, on the theory. And we want to say also that, yeah, we are happy to follow up on, if you have more questions, to follow up also by email afterwards.
To Jenny's point, we can certainly share further real cases, further guidance, all of which we have ready to go if you want to learn more. And if you want to talk, and also if you want to talk to us, if it's easy to talk through pieces as well, we're very, very happy to do that as well.
Yeah. And we do suggest as next steps as well. I mean, if any question comes up now, okay, Min, I see your hand up, so please give you the floor now.
No, it is not a. It could be a question, but what is it possible to co-own the process between you and the innovation team? I think that co-own in terms of the information, the data, the information, and products generated from the process. I think by that we may gain more buy-in and commitment from the teams. Yeah.
Do you want to answer that, should I? Okay.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, this whole process, we envision it to be participatory based on what is feasible, and also, you know, the time and motivation of being involved. So we'll be co-creating essentially a lot of the claims together based on these initial workshops that we want to, you know, facilitate, so that we can unpack some of these bits. And then how do we apply all this technical knowledge from an evaluation perspective in a way that it's formative? So there's a learning, you know, process also from your side in locating how this methodology can help you and support your work as well. So I see these kind of dual objectives. Tom, do you have anything more on that?
I was just going to say, in the papers that we have, that Alex and I wrote, we've got a specific section on the benefits and disbenefits of participation. So we've done this on maybe 8 or 9 occasions now, probably, among the team. And so some have been more participatory than others. We would very much like it to be more participatory, because we think that that adds value usually in terms of the types of claims that we have, the testability, assessment of evidence can also be potentially helpful. We obviously have to remain some distance as evaluators, but we've in the past been able to find ways to quality assure with things like rubrics and/or specific evidence tests, so that we don't have that kind of issue in any great extent. So it would be to our benefit if people are interested and want to participate. We would very much welcome that. I think Miria?
Yes, thank you so much. It was really interesting, your presentation, very insightful. I wanted to ask you, you know, that our country teams, they have, most of them launched or are starting their RCTs, their impact assessments. So how does your assessment concretely link to their ongoing work? And also a bit more on the timeline. I know you've showed a very detailed timeline in the very beginning, but what do you hope to achieve with us until end of this year, until mid next year, end of next year? And yeah, what is expected then from the teams? I saw that you, of course, want to reach out to some. I guess you will have some focal people that you will communicate through or with mainly, and then follow up with individual members. So just some more insight on the practical steps with us as an initiative.
Sure. So I can and then so yeah, so the idea is for us to setting up these initial conversations with the country teams in the coming weeks between October and November. We see this timeline to be you know, feasible, to go deeper into some of the key information that we require and we would like to receive, and also to unpack a little bit more some of this language around processes and, you know, how we apply this methodology. So sort of also building on that. We appreciate that a lot of the studies are being conducted right now, and in some countries the baseline have been finalized. In other countries are in process of conducting those baselines. So we'll be looking at all these different actions and, you know, linking them to specific claims. So, you know, what is going to be the use of this RCT? What is going to be the effect of having this study? The level of influence on specific actors. So we'll need to unpack a little bit more some of those claims together, essentially, through those, you know, kind of formative workshops, you know, where we construct some of these key bits. And then as we will be supporting over the course of 2024. So we will be looking at what kind of evidence is supporting a particular type of claim. And then at the end of the year, ideally, we would have enough sufficient information to do the validation of those claims. So, which also would entail additional data collection, verification, and so a more rigorous revision of everything that we're able to decide right now in the coming couple of months. So yeah, so this is a bit what we would expect. We also appreciate that there is an iterative nature in the sense of how like the formative phase could lead us to, you know, one specific area of change that then changes over time because of whatever external circumstances. So we want to remain flexible, making sure that there's as much analysis on the context and risks and, you know, possible trajectories of, you know, towards a specific outcome. So we really value this initial step to go deeper into some of this information. Yeah, I hope that replies to. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, good. I'm not sure if there is additional question from the participants, but of course the time is also over now. Of course, as Nicola and Tom already mentioned, you can always, of course, reach them via email. Thank you, Tom and Nicola, for giving us kind of the overall roadmap on the process tracing. This is really very insightful, and of course, very first-hand information from you. It's really a great pleasure to have you in our team. Having said this, first of all, I think we are discussing, so for those of you, so this is really quite interesting, really, to learn more about it. And for those who are interested, we are hoping to have this seminar, I mean, more, let's say, not really for 1 hour. Maybe it could be, let's say, 1.5 hours or 2, depending on the need. So maybe end of October or so, we'll decide. But for those of you who are interested, we'll send a kind of an email. For those who are interested, you could join us. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, and of course, we'll get back to you for meeting, for additional discussion. So please be cooperative and respond to those emails. With this, I will say thank you, everyone, for joining us as well. It's really a pleasure. I wish you all a great weekend.